Welcome, hello, I'm Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, SMWS Australia. And I'm sitting here today with Andrew Derbidge, our Cellarmaster for the Society. He's a structural engineer by day, society by night, I like to think. Writer, squash player, all-round whisky expert, and one of the many leading voices of growth of the Australian whisky appreciation as we know it today. I wanted to have a bit of a talk with him today, just have a sit down, have a bit of a chat, have some member-submitted questions, taste a bit of whiskey, see what's coming up, and we're going to answer some of the questions that you all submitted via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and elsewhere, and via email. So I want to just ask you where you come from with whiskey, how you got into the society, what your first entry into it all was. Where did you start? Where was your society start? What was your first entry into the Scotch Malt Whisky Society?
Yeah, great question. I'm trying not to give a very long and boring answer. I'm a structural engineer. I work with builders and architects, which means at the end of the day I need a good drink. And I got into Scotch at a pretty young age. I think I turned 18 or 19. And it was in my very early 20s when my father-in-law-to-be at the time came back with a bottle of Lagavulin. And I had...
White Horse?
Yeah, the old White Horse bottling. And that was just one of the epiphany moment. The scales fell from the eyes, and all of a sudden I was very interested in Scotch. Fast forward a couple of years, quite a few years after that, and the Society launched in Australia back in 2002. And I went to the very first launch event and had a fantastic time. How could you not? And that, I suppose, was my first introduction to the Society at that time. I went along to every single tasting in Sydney. I started being a loud mouth at the front and getting involved and helping out a little bit. And within a couple of years, the leadership team at the time said, Andrew, you should have more involvement, and it all sort of took off from there. So I started...
What year was that?
2005.
2005.
So 2005 took over as the state manager for New South Wales, and at the end of 2005 took on the role that we called whisky manager for about a month. And then decided that sounded a bit silly, so we just came up with the term Cellarmaster, which I still don't think is a great term, but it's stuck now for...
You look after the cellar.
I look after the cellar, yeah. It's good fun.
Yeah, I bet.
So from end of 2005, I've basically handled everything that's come into the society, from everything that's come in for the society into Australia. Went through a period there of writing all the tasting notes, writing all our magazine items and articles and issues, and obviously as the New South Wales State Manager, hosting all the events we did until this guy came along and took a big load off my shoulders. And still having a lot to do with whiskey in other circles as well. I wear a few caps, and they're all good caps to wear too. So does that...
No, that's pretty close, yeah. You mentioned tasting notes, and we obviously have a flavour profiling approach. And we publish all the tasting notes. They're on the front of the bottles. They're on the front of each bottle. There's a condensed version on the front of each bottle. But there's also, in each Outturn, have all the full tasting notes. And these just arrived this morning. We do apologise. They were late again. We're working on that. Tasting notes and flavour profiles. How do you approach flavour? When you're having a dram, what do you look for? How do you first approach flavour in a whiskey? What do you look for? Do you start with tasting notes? Do you start with flavour profiles or something else entirely, or a mixture of both?
Wow, that is a big and very deep question. For me, if I come home and I'm reaching for a dram, I'm a big believer that whiskey suits a mood. So to answer your question, I think the very first thing is, well, what mood am I in? And that almost dictates straight away, do you feel like reaching for something that's peated? Do you feel like reaching for something that's sherried? Sometimes when you're in a more contemplative mood, you might just want to reach for something very complex from Speyside that might have a little bit of everything, and you spend time with it. I've never really been a fan of reading tasting notes and going, geez, I write plenty of tasting notes, but I don't read...
You don't read too many of them?
I don't read too many other
That's
people.
right, you can say it,
yeah. Look, if someone says a whiskey is fantastic and you read a review and they describe it and it sounds like it's my cup of tea, then obviously I'll reach for it. But look, for me, it's more about what do I feel like. I'll loosely categorise something into, whether it's sweet, fruity, sherry, smoky, peaty, all the rest of it. In terms of the Society's flavour profiles, I think it was one of the most fantastic innovations Society ever came up with. And to my knowledge, there's really no other bottler or club or whiskey brand that's doing things along those lines. If you can probably cast your mind back 10, 12 years ago, imagine coming to a Society event when you were new to the world of whiskey, and you'd been to your local bottle shop and you'd seen your well-known brands there, and then you go along to this funny event where someone turns up and starts talking about a number. Hey, 51.11. And as the guy who was standing at the front of the room at the time, it was very hard to evoke The emotion and passion and the I guess the brand and the location and all the things about the bottle when you're really talking about a number, and trying to say to someone, oh, this bottle of 126.22 just screams sherry or peaty or whatever, was hard work. And when you looked at the society bottles at the time, there wasn't really anything that sort of leapt out at you. We didn't write all that fluff that you read on the back of so many brands today that talk about the water trickles over the lovely highlands and picks up this or this and that. We never went into the fluff. It was more about, this is good whiskey, come and drink it. So I loved it when the Society came out with the flavour profiles, where you could just simply say, well, I like this style of whiskey, and that particular bottle matches that flavour profile. Rich fruits, old and dignified. We've managed to pigeonhole them into 12, I think, diverse and well-spread categories that you can now use. And look, from a member's point of view, dare I use the word consumer, from a consumer's point of view, I think it's been a fantastic development.
Okay, well, I thought because you picked that one up, it's probably a good time for us to actually explore what this is. 51.11. It is in the sweet, fruity and mellow profile. We're going to have a taste of this today, and there's a good reason we're tasting it, because it's actually part of our March malt of the month, if you like. 51.11 Irish Danger Juice, and it is in the sweet, fruity and mellow flavour profile, this one. Dripped a bit on that one. That's why we're going to table
mine, typical.
Yeah, well, So,
first thing you should do is slange.
Indeed.
Now, this has not been set up, by the way. I'm nosing and tasting this for the first time. I guess that's not your first with this one, but
sort of is actually. No, because it's actually the brewers at Wayward tasted this one only just last week. This is a bit of a quick shameless plug, but we've got a tasting which is going to be pairing up 5 beers with 5 whiskies. It's a proper Boilermaker session with some Japanese food at Wayward Brewing in Camperdown, Sydney. That's 13th of February. So there's a whole bunch of great events coming up. If you check out the website smws.com.au/events, or just go to the smws.com.au homepage, they're all on there. And it was the brewer and Jackson over there that tasted this just the other day, and
straight away that's a fantastic nose, because I'm intrigued. There's interesting things that fly out of the glass. When I approach a whiskey for the first time and I'm nosing it, I judge. I'm very critical. I judge something straight away. Is this one-dimensional or is it interesting? And that split second, that first nose was, wow, there's actually a fair bit going on here. For me, it's sweetness. Obviously, if you had to come up with one word, there's
falls into that sweet, fruity and mellow very aptly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then underneath that sweetness, you then start finding the fruits.
Yeah. It's 56.7% ABV, natural cask strength. All of our single casks are bottled at natural cask strength, as many of our members will know. And it's a first fill ex-bourbon barrel.
And you do get that vanilla from the bourbon barrel, don't you?
Just a question from me, actually. When you're nosing a whiskey like this, do you often nose it with your mouth closed and open, just to get a bit of a different...
If I'm assessing a whiskey or writing tasting notes, whatever, absolutely, mouth open. It's the only way to really get the maximum out of your dram. If I'm sitting at home watching the footy, who cares?
Yeah. I'm going to have a taste of that. By the way, it's about middle of the day at the moment, so it's my first dram of the day, I promise.
I'm regretting we didn't start this earlier. That is sensational.
Yeah, it's delicious. I actually don't think I've ever seen this distillery bottled at cask strength before. I can't recall anyway, not in recent history at the very least. I mean, not in the last 7-8 years.
Not from their commercial offerings, no.
No.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That finish is holding on, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say, this just stays sweet. You get the juiciness of the oak stays with it. And it just lingers, doesn't it? It just stays for some time. But it's a footprint you're actually happy to have linger. Sometimes finishes can go in a direction where you quickly need to have another sip to refresh your palate, or you move on to something else. This for me is just sitting there and going, "Wow, this is nice. Enjoy me, spend some time with me, and drink a bit more of me."
So just to give the stats on that, 51.11. That means, for those who are unfamiliar with the coding, that's the 51st distillery to join the Society's coding system of single malts. Not to be confused with our grains or bourbons, etc. And .11 means that's only the 11th cask the panel have ever approved to bottle in 35 years. So we've seen very little out of that distillery from the Society, It's a 15-year-old single cask, single malt Irish whiskey, distilled in May 2002 and matured for 15 years in a first fill bourbon barrel.
Would you go so far as to join me in my assessment that I actually don't think that's a typically Irish whiskey?
It's not typically Irish at all. I'm not. I'll be completely honest. I'm not the biggest Irish whiskey fan. Generally speaking, I'm more of a Scotch whiskey guy, and I'd even take it's blasphemy, I know, but a bourbon over an Irish sometimes. But it's not typical of Irish whiskey in that Irish whiskey is often a lot, I guess, softer and more cleanly refined rather than being overly sort of charismatic like that. But yeah.
I think he makes a good point there. When you look at the textbooks and you read, well, what's the difference between Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey? The textbooks will say, well, Irish whiskey is triple distilled. In reality, very few Irish distilleries in the last 40 years have done that, have actually been triple distilled. This was the one distillery that was flying the flag for triple distillation in Ireland. And that third distillation obviously makes the spirit a bit more refined, a bit lighter, dare I say, less flavoured. And yet you'd get no sense of that in that bottling there. That is just screaming flavour for me. So I actually don't think it's very typical of the distillery nor the Irish style.
So that's going to be in our March Outturn. As far as I know Bar Lafayette in Perth have a bottle of that. There might be a few other partner bars, Whisky and Helmet will definitely have one as well in Melbourne. But we'll announce that on our socials as usual and in our emails coming into March Outturn as it's ready. Whilst we're enjoying that Dram, I thought we'd get to some of the Q&A that some of the members and friends have submitted. There's some awesome questions that have come through. There's probably about 20 or so questions that have come through, which is fantastic for our first video. I'm going to start with Mark Garraway's question. Andrew, are there any society bottlings that you can recall people went particularly crazy over, more than usual? Maybe where obtaining a bottle got even a little competitive.
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. And one of them was it was either my very first or second tasting. We used to have quarterly tastings back then, and back in 2005, and we had this bottle of it was a Japanese release from Yoichi. It was 116.7, and we had at that time 18 bottles in the country. And this was a tasting in Sydney, and Sydney was the first tasting for that little period. Some of the other cities weren't having theirs for another couple of weeks. So we turned up with this bottle. There were about 45 people in the room, and it was the fourth whiskey of the night. It was from a beautiful sherry butt. It was that signature. You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. That amazing ruby red sort of sherry Japanese whiskey.
Yeah, when they get it right, they get it so right, and that's what this one was. And it was one of those whiskies where, as the host at the front of the room, you really didn't have to say much about it. It just spoke for itself. And as we used to do it back then, we got to the end of the night and you'd collect all the order forms. And in fact, even before the end of the night, people were running across to Susie and handing in their order forms for that very purpose. And we had 18 bottles. We'd used one for the tasting, which means we had 17 left to sell. And we had something like 35, 36 orders for it that night. And I was meant to be showcasing this in other cities after that. So that was one that took off straight away. Another example was the amazing, and you'll probably hear me talk about this a lot in this video, the Glenfarclas bottling from a few years ago, 1.183. Which still to this day is probably one of the best whiskies I've ever had.
A vibrant enigma.
Well done, yes. Stunning bottle. We didn't have much of it. It was an amazing 48-year-old.
12 bottles or something, wasn't it?
Not much. Yeah. That just disappeared like that. So there are two I can think of off the top of my head.
Awesome. Martin Eber from Time for Whiskey, which we both know. If you had to choose, which one bottling best represents what the society is all about and why?
Martin, that's a great question. It's also, how the hell do you answer that? What one bottling? But I do have a good answer, and it's very unique to you because I think you answered your own question. You actually posted something on Facebook about 24 hours ago about a bottling of Loch Lomond that you had at a tasting there in Hong Kong. And in your words, you said that you'd tried many things from that particular distillery, and none of them had pushed your buttons at all. And then you had this society one that just did it for you. And I think that almost encompasses what the society is for many of us. You know, you think you know a distillery, you've pigeonholed it, you've said, oh, well, that's what it is, and you know, you either like it or you don't. And then you have this amazing bottling from the society, and it just changes your perception. So, look, I can list 2 or 3 other bottlings right now that did it for me, but I think you answered your own one with that Loch Lomond. Again, personally, 1.183 I think was a fantastic example. I thought I knew Glenfarclas. I thought I knew what it was about. When you step up to taste something that's 48 years old, you've already got an idea of what you think it's going to be like, and then for it to be the most vibrant, stunning, delicious thing with not a hint of over oaked or dryness or whatever, or tannins, that was just one of those moments where you go, this is what the society is about. This is why we do what we do and why it's so good.
Awesome. Soren via Twitter asks, out of all the releases, which one has surprised you most and why?
Which one surprised me most? We went. Can I give a really nerdy answer?
Yeah, nerdy better is even better. It's fine.
If you can cast your mind back, those of you who were drinking whiskey about 10 years ago, this is the industry at the time was very much pushing age statements. We've gone a long way from that away now, but at the time it was suggesting that whiskey would peak at about 15 years old. People were getting very excited about 15, 18-year-olds. We were seeing again the emergence of 25, 30-year-old expressions that were coming through the main brands and portfolios because they disappeared for a little while. So everyone was getting very excited about age and thinking that whiskey had to at least be a teenager to be any good. And then in from about 2009 to say 2012, the society started getting some surprisingly young whiskies that were sort of 6, 7, 8 years old, and they bucked the trend. And back at the time in our Outturn, every time we put an Outturn out, we used to have Director's Choice, or we had another name for it, which I suddenly can't think of. We would top scoring Dram. Our tasting panel used to list the top scoring Dram. And we went through, I don't know, we must have had 7 out of 8 Outturns where the top scoring Dram was an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. In fact, 9 was this magic number. We had quite a few 9-year-olds that were top scoring Drams. So youth surprised us, and there was one in particular that blew me away. 125.71 chocolate Coke float, which was a 6-year-old.
And actually, just on that point, that was my first ever society bottling. So that was the bottle that got me into the society, because I went to one of Andrew's tastings at the Royal Automobile Club in Sydney, and I tasted 125.71 chocolate Coke float, and I was blown away. It was 6 or 7-year-old, 6-year-old from Distillery 125, and it was I think it was a French oak cask.
Well done. It was new French oak.
French oak. That bottling blew me away, and I had no idea what whiskey was, and that changed my entire perspective on whiskey as well. Yeah.
So look, I think to have a 6-year-old just blew us away completely. There was another one going back 123.03, and it was matured in a refill port cask.
There were a bunch of port casks from 123, wasn't there?
This was the first, and then its sister casks flowed on after that.
There's a bottle of 123.8 somewhere here.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that was from the same parcel, and a bottle a few years later when it was a bit older. But this 123.03 Pink Ballerina, port casks are hit and miss, or port finishes, I should say. This spent its whole life in a port cask. And it just came out the most amazing. That's a lovely sort of light gold. This one was just pink, and hence the name of Pink Ballerina. It was 8 or 9 years old from memory. I was very familiar with that distillery. Again, this one just went in new directions. It was fantastic. So, great question, and I hope that goes some way to answering it.
Thanks, Soren. Danny, also via Twitter, asks, who is your hero in the whiskey world?
Who's my hero in the whiskey world? Okay, I'm going to give... I had to think about this. I'm going to give an answer... that sounds like it's coming from a politician, but there are some wonderful people in the whiskey industry. There's some whiskey celebrities. We all know the Jim McEwens of this world, the Richard Pattersons. Dr. Bill Lumsden is a hero of mine. I think he's fantastic. You look at what he does from a scientific point of view, from a production point of view. He's up there, and then to boot, he's actually a fantastic entertainer and a good bloke and a mate as well. So I could rattle off 8 or 9 industry names that you would know, industry writers, people that are in the industry, and they're all heroes of mine. But they're not who I want to shine a light on. For me, the true, not hero, but heroes, plural, of the industry, are the people that you come across when you actually go to the distilleries in Scotland and you see the guys behind the scenes. If you've ever done a tour of a Scottish distillery, you would have been taken around by someone who's spending their summer holidays leading people around, and that's their job. They don't appear on Facebook or Instagram for their troubles, and yet they're taking people through a distillery. And when you leave that tour, they've just made 5 or 6 new ambassadors who then go back to their home and talk about it. I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time in the production side of a couple of distilleries, and you meet the brewer. You meet the guy whose job it is just to sit there and take the mash and ferment it into a beer. I've spent a day sitting down with the distillers who sit there just behind the panel distilling. These are the anonymous people. They're the folks that aren't in the limelight. They don't necessarily get a pat on the back, but they are there day in, day out. I was about to say 9 to 5. It's shift work, so a lot of these distilleries work around the clock on 24 hours. So some of these people are working from midnight till 8 a.m, doing a really important part of the process that 12, 15 years later, we get to enjoy. Those are the heroes for me.
That's awesome. That is a very politician response.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very good.
But it's true. It's
very
from
good.
the heart.
This next question is one that I get often asked at a lot of tastings, and of course a lot of members are always keen to know where this one's going. So the question was asked by our ACT State Manager Drew McKinney and also by Rohan Hitch, a member. So it says the question is essentially what Australian whisky shows the most promise to become the first Australian SMWS distillery, and the other question was any chance of an Aussie cask. If we were to rephrase that into one, we'll talk about the Australian whisky and the society. If you want to rewind a bit of history on that one, just to start with.
Yeah, look, great questions from Rowan and from Drew there. The society kicked off in Australia in 2002. Cast your mind back to the distilleries that were Australian distilleries that were operating at that time and who had matured stock, and it's a pretty small list. When I came on board as Cellarmaster right at the end of 2005, we were starting to hear a bit more about some Australian distilleries opening up, and then for the next 5-6 years it was, when will we see an Australian distillery? Of course, at the time, when you look at the bigger distilleries that were around that actually had stock that we could do something with, it was a very short list. We would approach our colleagues in Scotland to say, well, what do we have to do to bottle an Australian cask? And at that time, a lot of the Australian distilleries were still just filling into very small casks. The society would only bottle a single cask. And
a lot of them still are.
Yeah. So you couldn't really... And don't forget, the society is a global club. When we bottle a cask and there's 500 bottles, that's for a lot of branches around the world. So when we were looking at possible Australian releases that might have come from a 50 litre or 100 litre barrel, and there were only 80, 90 bottles to go around the world, you couldn't really make much of a song and dance about that. So just simply the scale of production and the economies of scale made it very difficult to do much for quite a while. And then we went through a phase where we were trying to get samples sent across to the UK tasting panel. At the time, some of them came back and said, well, we just don't quite think it's there yet. If you're going to have the first Australian whisky, you want it to be an absolute laydown misère winner, and a couple of samples we got just weren't quite there. And now we're in this amazing period where there is some fantastic Australian whisky around. That award that Sullivan's Cove won in 2014 kind of changed the landscape a little bit. And it also did a few things that we didn't quite foresee. And we spoke to a few distilleries at that time and got some samples sent to us that were great whiskies, easily worthy of wearing the society label. But of course, to acquire them, we've got to buy the cask. And at that time, we spoke with one distillery in particular, and it was quite happy to sell a cask to the society. The society was happy to acquire until we started talking dollars. And this distillery was offering us the cask at a price that made it more expensive than the rarest Japanese Karuizawa that the society had only just bottled. So that made it difficult as well. Where are we right now? Where it's an ongoing thing. We're chatting. We've actually got a green light to go ahead. We're just trying to talk to the right people, get the right profile, and more importantly, get the right quantity. Because any time the society comes out with a new number, a .1 as we like to call them, it really needs to be a winner. It's got to be right, and that takes a bit of work. So we're still at it, but as always, watch this space.
Indeed. I think we've got probably time for one or two more questions.
Great.
So we'll go with. Well, James Turton asked, I'm wondering what was the whiskey that Andrew tried and afterwards he thought, right, now I have to take whiskey seriously. Would you say that was that Lagavulin?
It was that Lagavulin, yeah, absolutely.
That's an easy one. And then we'll say one from Matt Wooler from Dram Nation that wrote, is there a dram that gets you in the mood for playing and winning squash? tournaments, and how many pairs of pristine Dunlop volleys do you own?
Right. Can't say I've ever had a scotch before running onto the squash court. Well,
You
actually, I have
lived.
many times,
You have,
but
yeah.
not on a tournament anyway. Sorry, Matt, I have not owned a pair of Dunlop volleys since 1988 when it was part of my school uniform for PE. So it's been a while. And in fact, no shoes or sneakers I have are pristine. So.
And how does he stay so devilishly good looking? Is it the whiskey, or is he sacrificing virgins whilst we sleep?
Yeah, well, that's
Submitted anonymously, that one.
someone who's clearly taking the mickey there. Look at the two of us. You know why he's the brand ambassador in front of camera, not me. So,
That's all we have time for. Andrew has to be on his way. Thank you so much for being with us today.
my pleasure.
And having a chat and answering some of your questions about the society, about his journey in whiskey, about whiskey in general, and keep an eye out for that. It's really worth knowing. We've got some fantastic events coming up. Andrew mentioned that some of the most amazing whiskey revelations that members have and that we have with our members in sharing these experiences are even just coming up this at the moment. Sydney, we've got the Boilermakers at Wayward. I have to check the Outturn. It is on the inside back page of your Outturn. It's the Boilermakers at Wayward. There's a few tickets left for that. Last time I checked, it was less than 10, so you'd want to jump on that. Both Melbourne events have sold out. I'm sorry, there's another Melbourne event coming very shortly. Perth is this weekend, which will be great. That's come along. That's the bar pop-up at Bar Lafayette. Stumbling my words there. We've got our Valentine's Day tasting in Adelaide, Whiskey Kisses. That's whiskey and dessert pairing with Haynes & Co. In Adelaide. We've got the Canberra Masterclass with a twist, it's called. We haven't announced what the twist is yet, but it's going to be very exciting. And we've got the Wollongong Bulleye Brewing Boilermakers coming up as well. It's all on the back page, inside back page of your Outturn there. Again, thanks, Andrew, for being with us. And
Thank you.
happy dramming.
Happy dramming.
And we'll see you for the next instalment. Cheers.
Bye for now.